Hey, what's going on, you guys? So I heard from some of you in the comment section really asking for help with punctuation. And it's kind of what I'm here to do. So I really wanted to give you guys a breakdown of all the punctuation marks that you need to know on digital SAT, but one video isn't going to do it. So in this video, what I plan to do is just give you guys an overview of the punctuation marks that you need to know. And I will cover some punctuation questions on the digital SAT from the practice exams that College Board released, and I'll start to give you guys some insight into the different punctuation rules that you have to know for certain punctuation marks. This will give you guys a nice sort of base, a nice idea of what you're going to be tested on and how you're going to be tested. However, it's not going to be enough for you guys to really break into that top percentile score because from my experience with working with over 7,000 kids, I realized that students really lack um, fundamentals. And so there's one sort of key piece that's missing, right? That if you understood this would help unlock everything, right? With punctuation marks and sentence structure. And so I'm not going to share that with you all in this video. This video is just going to provide you guys with a nice overview of the different punctuation marks that you'll need to know and just how you're going to be tested, right? With punctuations on the digital SAT. And so I want to try to keep these videos as short as possible, but still give you guys the information that you need. So I know that I can't please all of you guys, and that is kind of what my job, what I really want to do. You guys know that my goal is to help you guys score fewer than 5 wrong consistently on the digital SAT. Any exam that you guys are given, you guys are able to score fewer than 5 wrong. But again, without being able to work with you guys in person, getting to know your tendencies, how you think, that's kind of difficult for me to do, right? And so I'm just going to present information that I know, um, and not everything that I know, but just a piece of what I know. And then you guys give me some feedback in the comment section and let me know, hey, could you explain more about this? Or hey, I'm still confused with this, right? Or hey, this is good. Can we talk more about this? Like you guys can help guide the instruction, and that'll give me a clear sense of what type of video to create next. Because guys, I'm very, very flexible in how I can teach this class. I can teach grammar, SAT grammar in 1,000 different ways. It just depends on who I'm working with. And so if you guys kind of engage with me via the comment section, subscribe, like, all of that sort of stuff, just engage with me. Let me know what you're having trouble with. Let me know what makes sense to you. Let me know what you guys want a little bit more of, right? And the more that you guys ask, the clearer that you guys ask, right? Ask precise questions and you guys will get very clear answers. Because I'm pretty confident that I have most of the answers to the questions that you guys are asking or wanting to know, the answers that you're wanting to know for digital SAT. All you have to do is be able to ask, but ask precisely. I can't read your minds, and a lot of times students ask very sloppy questions. Right? It's very vague in general, right? Because the question isn't clear in their mind. So make sure that you clarify precisely what it is you want to know in your mind, right? And then from there, proceed to write that out as clearly as possible in the comment section, because I read all the comments that you guys write. And then from that, I can start to be inspired to create new videos for you. Okay. So again, this video, like I mentioned, is just going to be an overview of the punctuation that you'll need to know for the SAT. So just before we jump into this, just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about who I am. I have to do this in all my videos. So my name is Jin Bae, but you guys can just call me Jin Teacher or Jin Sem. Sem is like the Korean slang for teach, right? So you guys can call me Jin Sem, Jin Teacher. Jin is fine, but just don't call me Jin Sir or Mr. Jin. Okay, those names are reserved for my dad. They make me feel old, although I am pretty old. I don't like to feel it, so don't make me feel that way. I am a top 1% scorer in pretty much any and all things English verbal section related. The SAT, the ACT, the GMAT exams, I've been able to score in the top 99 percentile on these tests. I also have 14 years of experience working with over 7,000 kids in one of the most academically competitive areas in the world, Seoul, South Korea. And I've been fortunate and blessed enough to have been recognized as a top test prep instructor out there during my time from the majority of my career in Seoul. I'm also an author and a content creator. Just signed a contract with a Korean publishing company, and an SAT book that I wrote practice test 4, that's going to be released probably before the end of this year. But I'm also working on creating self-publishing books on Amazon and using video technologies to create answer explanations. You guys will just be able to scan in a QR code and see a video explanation of that question that you guys are working through. I think it's a very cool way to incorporate technology into your learning experience. But yeah, I've written thousands of practice questions for a multitude of of different standardized exams, right? The SAT, the ACT, the writing, the reading sections. Yeah, the old SAT, the new SAT, right? All of that kind of stuff. And again, you guys, my goal is to really help you guys miss fewer than 5 questions consistently. And this is my number one priority for each and every one of you guys. So every other goal that I have, my goal isn't to get you guys to like me. My goal isn't to help, isn't to get subs on this channel, right? Although those are some things that I would like, right? My main priority, my number one goal, the goal that supersedes all other goals is to help you guys miss fewer than 5 questions consistently. Now, the key word is consistently, right? And what I mean by that is no matter how difficult the SAT, reading and writing section is that you're given on that one particular moment is, you're still able to get fewer than 5 wrong, right? If it's easy, good, fewer than 5 wrong, right? I don't want your scores to fluctuate, right? One of the biggest indicators of how you'll do on the actual exam is the consistency is this factor here, right? So out of the thousands of students that I teach, right, it's not about like getting an 800 or a 780 or a 750. That's not a very good indicator, right? A very good indicator is the number of questions that you're getting wrong, right? And so this is why I kind of make this my goal for each and every one of you. And I think it's smart that you make it your goal for yourselves as well. If you're able to get fewer than 5 wrong on, I would say 5 exams in a row, you're ready for the real test, right? Now, I know that that's one of the areas that a lot of students have like a lack of confidence in. Like, I don't know when I'm ready for the test. I don't know when I'm ready. Well, this tells you that you're ready, right? So this is, I guarantee this is the most reliable indicator of how you'll perform on the actual test, right? Is if you're able to if you get fewer than 5 wrong consistently, 5 tests in a row, right? You're ready for the actual exam. You're ready for the actual, like, sorry guys, I'm working with, so I'm not used to working with so many monitors and all this technology in front of me. So you're gonna have to mind me a little bit. I also know that I don't have a lot of time for this. I'm currently in a PhD program, and so I have to spend the majority of my time doing that. Not I have to, I really want to. It's really interesting and engaging. But I also want to give you guys the top tier, top 1% instruction for the SAT, because I know that this test is manageable. I know that you guys can achieve the scores that you guys want to. I know that's all possible, right? You guys just need help, right? And I'm pretty confident now. I know that I'm not cocky, but I'm pretty confident that I can help the majority of you guys, boost your scores, right? Kind of one step at a time. But anyways, you guys, my goal again is to help you guys miss fewer than 5 questions consistently, right? And we're just taking steps to do that, right? I can't teach you everything that you need to know in one video. It's impossible, right? I can only teach you guys, right, certain things each video. And the other thing is, guys, I don't want to give you guys too much information every video, because if you try to hear everything that I have to say about punctuation marks, you're going to remember nothing, right? So what I would recommend, so I'm not trying to give you guys too much. I'm just trying to give you guys very strategic pieces of information, okay? And your job is to not try to remember everything, but try to learn 1 or 2 things really well, right? And what kind of things should you learn well? Well, this should be 1 or 2 things that are very meaningful for you at this point in your journey, right? So some of you guys might have trouble with commas. Other students might be very fine with commas, right? But then they might struggle with semicolons, right? So what I have to say about semicolons might speak to you more than it might speak to another person. Okay, so to make that your mindset when you guys are learning, when you guys are going through or watching this video, okay? So with that, well, you guys already saw that. So with that being said, you guys, let's jump into it, okay? So I'm gonna give you guys a brief overview of the different punctuation marks that you need to master. Keyword is master, not just know, not just kind of sort of know, but you have to know this extremely well, right? To the point where you're able to execute on your knowledge, right? 99 out of 100 times correctly when you're asked punctuation questions. that is extremely possible. I've taught thousands of students to do this. And again, there's one key, right? I really feel like there's one fundamental key, right, that a lot of students miss. Not just like the beginning students, not just the, English as a second language speaking students, but all students, even students who grew up in the States, right? Students who go to top, 5 high schools in the country. I've taught them all, and still I find this one thing to be consistently missing, that when I help unlock this one thing, students are able to, again, master, right, punctuation marks and sentence structure on the digital SAT. Okay, that's not going to be for this video, but I will kind of share with you guys towards the end what that is, and then in a future video I will create videos that help teach you, right, that help really teach you what you need to know, right, all the knowledge pieces that you need to know to master punctuation marks. Okay, so with that being said, what are the punctuation marks that you need to know for the SAT? Well, we have commas. So commas is the most common one. We also have semicolons, we have colons, we have periods, we have dashes, right? We have a single dash, and we also have double dashes. Okay, we have parentheses, right? And we have apostrophes, right? And then we have question marks, right? So there are 9 punctuation marks that you need to master for the digital SAT to be able to score extremely well, to be able to get every single punctuation and sentence structure question correct on the digital SAT exam. Now, this is what I believe every student's able to do this, and this is the bar that I set. This is the standard that I set for all of my students. Right? You're able to get every single punctuation and sentence structure question correct. You are, right? But there are certain things that you have to master, right, for each of these punctuation marks. And the biggest thing that you really have to know, you guys, for punctuation marks is, let me make sure that my pen is working here. Here we go. Cool. So the biggest thing that you really have to know first and foremost, you guys, is rules. Right? You have to know punctuation rules. There's no two ways about it. You can't shortcut this. Okay. Now I am going to teach you guys some of these rules for different punctuation marks, but this isn't the correct way to learn punctuation rules. You don't want to learn the rules in a very scattered way. Right? What I mean by that is you want to focus on all of the rules for commas that you need to know separately, right? So when you think about commas, these are the rules that you have to know. When you think about semicolons, these are the rules that you have to know. So you want to learn these rules separately, like one-on-one. And I'll create separate videos for each punctuation mark, teaching you guys the rules that you'll be tested on the SAT. Not in this video though. So in this video, I'll just share with you guys some of the rules, right? But I'll do so in the form when we take a look at certain questions that the SAT can ask, right, when it comes to punctuation marks. Okay, so and also, you guys, just as a quick note, if some of you guys are kind of curious, the punctuation marks that are, I think, the most tested, I would say, is definitely commas, right? Semicolons. Well, they're all like very frequently tested, but I would say that these are the ones that are tested most often, right? I would say these guys, okay? And usually you're going to be tested on these punctuation marks together, right? It's commas, semicolons, periods, right? You can even include like dashes as well, right? So these are typically the types of answer choices that you might see, right? So answer choice A might have a comma, answer choice B might have a period, answer choice C might have a dash or a or a colon, right? So again, these are the sort of punctuation marks that you might see for different, for different grammar questions. But these are the ones that are most frequently tested. You also are going to be tested separately or individually on apostrophes. So they have a separate question type where they're asking you just about apostrophes. And you have a separate question type that asks you about question marks, right? Direct or indirect questions. And you also have a separate question type that asks you only about commas. Okay. Otherwise, they usually just kind of group all of these punctuation marks together, right? Commas, semicolons, periods, colons, single dash, double dashes, and parentheses. These are all kind of grouped together when they test you on punctuations and sentence structure. But again, like I said, there are separate question types, right, for commas, apostrophes, and question marks. Okay, we'll take a look at some of those today. So let's jump into it, you guys. So these questions are taken from College Board's practice exams. You guys can download these on the College Board website. Just type in Digital SAT Practice Test 1 College Board or something. Then you can download these tests for free. You'll see what test number it is. There's 6 practice tests on College Board's website right now. This is test 1, module 1, because there's 2 modules that they give you, right? And we know what section it is, right? So this is the writing section. So even though reading and writing are combined together in one module, half of the module, the first half of the module is dedicated to reading type of questions, and the second half of the module is dedicated to writing types of questions. We're just focusing on grammar, which falls under the writing category, right? So we'll be looking at the second half of these practice exams that College Board presents. Okay, and we know it's question number 20 as well. I've gone one step further to help you guys out and just kind of label the type of question, right? The concept or the question type that this question is engaging you with, right? So we're being tested on punctuation because that's the whole theme of today's class. The first thing that you have to know, you guys, most of the time when you're tested on punctuation, you're going to be tested on sentence structure as well. Okay, and so there are certain things about sentence structure that you also have to need to know extremely well. We can't cover all of those things together in this lesson, but I will kind of briefly mention some of those to you guys today. And you know what? My face is covering uh, half of the part of the answer choices. So this is no, that's not good. This is okay, but nah, we'll stick to this. We'll stick to this scene. All right. So let me help you guys out here. We'll first take a read through the perfect. We'll first take a read through the passage. Now I'll also share with you guys certain tips when it comes to problem solving. Okay, so these are the things that I do that's helped me become really successful on these tests. And these are the things that I've taught to thousands of students as well. Like I've noticed that I can't assume anything about students. It's silly and dumb of me to assume that you guys know, right, how to do things. Simply, it's not fair, right? So I never assume anything of you guys. Um, and I think that's good because I don't label you guys in any way, right? I'm here to help and serve you guys. And so everything that I say is just from what I do and what I found to be very effective for me. And if it helps one of you guys out, right, then my job on this planet is successful. Okay. I've done a really successful job. So I'll share with you guys some things. So the passage reads, in ancient Greece, an Epicurean. Oh, I guess I should mention, you guys, for grammar questions, right? When you get to writing questions, I like to take a look at the answer choices first, okay? And so you guys can kind of see, just taking a broad view of the answer choices, you notice different punctuation marks, right? You notice a colon, a semicolon, a comma, and a period, right? So when you notice different punctuation marks, you have to be thinking to yourself, oh, they must be testing me on punctuation, right? Usually when they test you on punctuation, well, that's obvious, but usually when they test you on punctuation, they're also going to be testing you on sentence structure. Okay, now sentence structure just basically refers to how the sentence is structured, how it's built, right? So is it a complete sentence? Is it an incomplete sentence, right? There are sentence structure errors that will be presented, right? Based on different types of punctuation that you'll be given as in answer choices. Okay, so let's be mindful of that. Okay, so I know we're being tested on punctuation. Now let's read. It says, in ancient Greece, an Epicurean was a follower of Epicurus, a philosopher whose beliefs revolved around the pursuit of pleasure. Epicurus defined pleasure as the absence of pain in the body and of trouble in the soul, of trouble in the soul, of trouble in the soul, positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence. So first of all, you guys, first tip is read to the end of the sentence, right? Read to the end of the sentence, right? And just make observations, okay? So the first time that you read it through, don't just stop after you when you get to the pause, the underlined blank, don't just stop here, right? You want to read to the end of the sentence, right? Read to the end of the sentence. You know the end of the sentence is here because you have the period, right? So read to the end of the sentence and you're just making observations. Don't try to solve the question, right, while you're reading. You're just noting things. You're just noticing and observing things. Okay. That's going to be tip number one. Tip number two, you guys heard me kind of do this, is, for grammar questions, you want to plug in answer choice A. Whatever answer choice A says, just plug this into the underlined blank, right? Don't just read it as a blank. Don't just say, and of trouble in the blank, that all life's virtues derived from this absence. That's super confusing, you guys, right? Don't do that, right? So you want to say, and of trouble in the soul, positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence, okay? So plug in answer choice A. The reason why you want to read to the end of the sentence is because the SAT is really good at hiding certain context clues, like important information, important details in the non-underlined portions, right? Oftentimes it could come after the underlined blank. It doesn't always, but sometimes it does. So you want to be kind of mindful of that, right? And just make sure that you read to the end, right? Is it? Then you want to plug in answer choice A because, again, without doing so, and if you just read it as a blank, it doesn't make very much sense to you, right? So plug in answer choice A is going to help out. Okay. Now the first thing that I notice here, you guys, right, is I do notice different. So one of the things that you're tested on for this particular question is sentence structure. Okay. Um, So sentence structure errors that you'll be tested on like sentence fragments, right? As well as like run-on sentences. Okay, these are just some terms that you have to know, right? Sentence fragments and run-ons. A fragment is basically just an incomplete sentence. It's not an independent clause, right? It's not an independent clause. It's an incomplete sentence, right? And that's not good because that creates a sentence structure error, right? Every single sentence that you read on the SAT has to have at least one independent clause in it. It can't be an incomplete sentence, okay? And a run-on sentence is basically when we have two independent clauses that are not properly punctuated, right? So you have the wrong punctuation mark that separates two independent clauses. So that's the first thing that I notice here, right? Now, why is that type of knowledge or that observation very useful? Well, it's very useful because I noticed that certain punctuation marks, right? So if you notice answer choice C and D, we have a semicolon and we have a period, right? Well, this is where you have to know the certain rules for a semicolon and a period, okay? So this is where your knowledge of rules really comes in handy. Like you have to know the rules, right, for these punctuation marks that you're being tested on. Now, I would say the period and the semicolon are the easiest punctuation mark rules to learn. The punctuation or the rule for a period is just simply a period is used to separate two independent clauses. Okay? So independent clause 1, independent clause 2, we have a period that separates the two. Simple enough, right? Jack is a boy, period. Jill is a girl, period, right? That's grammatically correct. Okay? We're not trying to be fancy, we're trying to be grammatically correct. Okay? So period does that job, right? That's the rule for a period that you just have to know. Okay, you're not going to be tested on like uppercase, lowercase letters or things like that. It's just, is this period used correctly or not? Okay, so that's the rule that you're going to be tested on. Now, if you don't know what independent clauses are, right? Independent clause is just a complete sentence, right? Where you have a subject, verb, and a complete thought. Now, it's extremely important that you're able to identify independent clauses, dependent clauses, and phrases, because that is the fundamental knowledge that you need to master punctuation and sentence structure. Without knowing very well what independent clauses, dependent clauses, and phrases are, you're going to have a very, very hard time with punctuation and sentence structure questions. Okay, so what I noticed, and also you guys, secondly, is a rule for a semicolon. So right now, the main rule that you have to know, the main rule, it's not the only rule, but it's the rule that you're going to be tested on 99% of the time with semicolons, right? So the main rule that you have to know for semicolons is similar to the rule for a period. right? So a semicolon is used to separate two independent clauses, right? So I see one, semicolon, I sees two. Okay, I see one, semicolon, I sees two. So same thing. I see, period, I see, right? I see, period, semicolon, I see. Okay, the function of a semicolon and a period is identical, right? So this is where, well, I'll teach you guys this shortcut after, but this is where now we want to check. Okay, so if we, what do I mean by check? Right, I want to check to see if the information before and the information after the period or the semicolon is an independent clause, right? So in this case, what I'll do is I'll check after the period, okay, and it reads positing that all positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence. Guys, that is not an independent clause. It's not a complete sentence, right? Positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence is missing a main verb and it's missing a complete thought. This is just a super long subject, right? Positing that all life's virtues derive from this absence. What about that, right? Is it good? Is it bad, right? We don't have a verb and a complete thought. We have an incomplete sentence, right? So this is where we have a grammatical error, a sentence structure error, right? So we know that we don't have an independent clause after the period, so that's enough for us to check. So now we know with certainty that answer choice D is going to be wrong because we don't have an IC after the period, right? And this is the cool shortcut, is you also immediately know that answer choice C is wrong as well, right? Why? Because the rule for a semicolon is the same as a rule for a period, right? And we already checked, right? The information after the period, right, is not a complete sentence. And for answer choice C, the information after the semicolon is exactly the same, right? We also know it's not an independent clause as well. It's not a complete sentence, right? So we know that's not an IC. So we know for sure that answer choices C and D are going to be wrong. Now it just leaves us with answer choice A and B. And so here, so the next rule, the next punctuation mark that you have to be very familiar with, right, is a colon. Oop. Is a colon. Okay, so the rule for a colon, you guys, there's three things that you want to check for. Okay, the first thing is the information before. By the way, a colon is just when we have those two dots, right? Period, period, right? Those two dots. The first thing that you want to check for is the information before the colon, right? This has to be an independent clause. It has to have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. If it doesn't, then a colon is automatically the wrong answer, okay? Because it violates that colon or that punctuation rule. A second thing is, so if we check here, Epicurus is the subject, defined as the verb, right? He defined pleasure as the absence of pain in the body and of trouble in the soul. Right? So boom, that's a complete sentence, right? We have a subject, verb, and a complete thought. So we do have an independent clause. Okay. So what's the second thing that you have to check for? The second thing that you have to check for is the information after the colon. Right? What does the information after the colon do? Like, what is its function? What is its job? The information after the colon has to clarify, right, or explain what came before, right? Has to explain what appeared before. What appeared before the colon. In other words, the information after the colon, right, has to clarify something, an idea that the independent clause presented. Okay, it has to kind of, so it's basically kind of restating, it's clarifying, it's referring back to what was previously talked about, and it's just adding, right, a more clarifying type of explanation. Okay, so a very common, so I'll give you guys a very simple example of a proper use of a colon. You guys have probably seen this a lot, right? So if I said, oh, there were three things that I bought at the grocery store, right? There were three things that I bought at the grocery store. And then I have a colon here, right? And then now I kind of mention, oh, apples, right? Chips and dip, right? So the information after the colon here, it clarifies what was previously talked about, right? It refers back to, right, what was previously mentioned, and it clarifies it, right? In this case, it clarifies it by giving you specific items, right? Specific things that you bought, right? Apples, chips, and dip. Okay, so that's what we're checking for here. Right now, if we look at the information after the colon in the sentence, right? It says positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence. So you have to ask yourself, does this clarify what was previously talked about, right? Does this clarify what was previously sorry for my extremely messy handwriting. It is something that you guys are just gonna have to put up with. I apologize. I've made peace with it. I hope you guys can too. So does this clarify what was previously talked about? Now, this is where you have to kind of make a very clear distinction, okay? One of the ways that the SAT is going to test you or trick you is, between information that clarifies what was previously said versus information that expands, right? That expands on what was previously said. Okay, so clarifying what was previously talked about versus expanding on what was previously talked about. Can you guys hear the difference? If you clarify what was previously talked about, you're hitting back on what was previously mentioned, right? I bought three things at the store, right? What were those three things? I'm going to clarify, right? It was apples, chips, and dip. So that hits back on what was previously mentioned, right? And it clarifies it, right? But expanding on it, right, is going to build on what was previously talked about, right? By continuing the discussion by providing new information. And so if I say, I went to the store, oh, I bought three things at the store for the party tonight. For the party tonight. In this case, you can't have a colon, right? Because the information for the party tonight does not clarify what was previously talked about. Instead, the information after the colon, right, expands on, it builds on what was previously mentioned, right, by adding new information. Right? So think about like expanding on as kind of building the sentence out horizontally, right? It kind of gives you new information, right? Versus elaborating or versus clarifying what was previously talked about, it kind of just hits back on. It kind of goes back on what was mentioned and just gives you clarifying information. So it might give you more specificity or more depth, right? But it doesn't give you more breadth. Okay. And so that's how you have to think about this, right? So that's kind of tricky for students to do, but that's the main way that the SAT is going to test you on it, right? Is this information clarifying, right? Or is it expanding on what was previously mentioned, right? Now, in this case, it's. Can you guys all see? What do you guys think it is? What do you guys think it's doing? It's definitely expanding, isn't it? It's expanding on the previous information. Right? Because yeah, he's building on, right, the definition of pleasure, right, by saying that all life's virtues derived from the absence of pain in the body, right? It's not clarifying anything that was mentioned previously. Can you guys notice the difference? Right? This is why answer choice B here is going to be incorrect. right? And this is why A is going to be the only answer that works, okay? Now, just a quick note, you guys, for sentence structure. One of the types of one of the common types of sentence structures that I want you guys to get familiar with is this here. Independent clause, comma, phrase, right? Especially like independent clause, comma, like an ing phrase. Okay. This sentence structure is grammatically correct, right? It's just one that's not very common to a lot of students. Just know that it's okay. In this case, basically, what the ing phrase does, right? It kind of just modifies, right? It modifies or describes, right, the independent clause. Okay, so I'll give you guys an example of this. If I say, the bomb exploded in the city, comma, then I say destroying everything in a 5-mile radius. So destroying everything in a 5-mile radius would be my ing phrase, right? Now that just kind of elaborates, or it describes, it modifies the independent clause, right? And it does so in this case by just kind of telling you what happened like simultaneously, right? Or what happened right after, right? So it gives you this sort of this time piece of information, right? Like it tells you about things that happen simultaneously, or if an event just occurred right after another event, right? So the bomb exploded and then destroying everything in a 5-mile radius is like the simultaneous sort of event, right? Or it's the event that happened right after, right? The bomb exploding, right? Is all. Okay. So that's typically how these ing phrases or this type of sentence structure is used. And get familiar with it. Just know that it is grammatically acceptable. It is a grammatical sentence structure. It's proper, right? And that's the function of it. The SAT likes this type of sentence structure, and a lot of students don't know about it. So it's good for you guys to get exposed to it right now. Okay, so good. Let's jump on to another type, you guys. So if we take a brief look at the answer choices, can you guys notice, right? Different punctuation marks, right? We notice a colon, we notice a comma, and then we notice like no punctuation. In this case, don't get too tripped up. Sometimes the SAT test makers will add words, right? Like but, while, however, they'll add these sort of words, but just know that generally, in this case, when you notice colon and a comma, you're being tested on punctuation. Okay, punctuation again. Usually you're going to be tested on punctuation and sentence structure simultaneously. Okay, so in this case, remember, let's read the sentence. And remember, you guys, we want to read to the end, right? So it says, researchers studying magnetosensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. In the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points down into the ground, but in the southern hemisphere, it points up toward the surface and away from worms' food sources. Okay, so again, like I said, you guys are going to have to read to the end of the sentence, right, and just make observations. Okay, I know it can sometimes feel like you're losing control, right, of understanding, because you're like, when is this sentence gonna stop, right? You just gotta trust it and just keep reading to the end in faith, right? Read to the end in faith, and you're just making observations, you guys. All of the analysis, all the evaluation stuff will happen afterwards, but in the beginning, you're just making observations. You're just noting something, okay? And this is something that I noted. It was very helpful for me when you remain calm and just read to the end of the sentence and you're just observing things. You can see things, right, more clearly than if you're just in this state of confusion and worry, right, and fear, right? So just make observations, remove your emotions from all of this stuff, right? It's not going to be helpful. So what I notice here, you guys, is I notice, well, a couple of things, okay? A couple of things. Um, First of all, it's a long sentence, right? What I noticed was we actually have two independent clauses in the sentence. Okay. Let me explain. So the first independent clause, right? The subject is researchers, but researchers studying magnetosensation is my complete subject. Have is my verb, right? Have determined is my verb. So we have a subject and a verb, and then we have to have a complete thought. So where does this thought end? Researchers have determined why soil dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. Okay, so it's going to end right here. Okay, now I'll explain why this is a little bit tricky. The second independent clause, the subject is the magnetic field. The magnetic field is my subject, and then points is my verb, right? The magnetic field points down, right? Is my complete sentence, is my complete thought, right? The magnetic field points down, complete sentence, right? So I have an independent clause number 2 there. And here's the other thing, is I have another independent clause. I actually have 3 independent clauses in the sentence, right? And the third one is separated. It's separated from the second one, right, with a comma and a fanboys word. Okay. The third independent clause is it is my subject, points is my verb, it points up is my complete sentence, right? So I actually have 3 independent clauses, not 2. Okay. But you really have to just look at these 2 here. Okay. You have to notice these 2 independent clauses, and you have to have the proper punctuation to separate these 2 independent clauses, right? If you notice answer choices B and D, answer choice B and D separates the 2 independent clauses with just a comma, or with no punctuation. Okay, well, what's the problem there, right? When we separate 2 independent clauses with just a comma or with no punctuation, we create a sentence structure error called a run-on sentence, right? Remember that. Run-on sentences and fragments are the 2 most common types of sentence structure errors that you'll encounter. A run-on sentence is basically when we have 2 independent clauses that are not properly punctuated, right? And that creates a grammatical error. So it's like me saying, Jack is a boy, comma, Jill is a girl. You guys would all be able to tell that that's not grammatically correct, right? And that's the same thing for this sentence as well. It's just that the SAT makes this harder by adding in like phrases, like in the Northern Hemisphere. They're doing this to distract you. They're doing this to distract you from this part here. The magnetic field points down, right? Well, if you're reading for sentence structure, if you're reading for grammar, you'll avoid making this mistake, right? So you notice that it is a run-on sentence, so you can know immediately B and answer choice D are going to be wrong, right? And then I think all of you guys will be able to tell that like C here doesn't make any sense when you read it, right? But if you plug in answer choice C and just read it, you get researchers have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food while in the northern hemisphere. You know what I'll say? I'll say this also creates a run-on sentence, right? It's just kind of now adding the word while to make you think, oh, let's combine these. Let's combine this phrase with the previous sentence, right? Again, it's a distraction. And this is why it's so important to read to the end of the sentence. Can you guys see that? Because if you did not read to the end of the sentence, you just notice, you're going to miss this part here. If you read to the end of the sentence and just make observations, you'll notice that this part is an independent clause. If you notice it's an independent clause and you have another independent clause before, you know that answer choices B, C, and D are all going to be wrong immediately. And you know that A is the only one that's going to work, right? Without even having to check, right, the rules for a colon, you know that A is the correct answer because B, C, and D all create run-on sentences, a sentence structure error, okay? But, so this is why A is going to be the correct answer. Now, we talked about in the previous question, we talked about the 3 sort of rules for a colon, right? Information before the colon has to be an independent, information before the colon has to be an independent clause. Yeah, and that is what we have, right? We already talked about what the independent clause is, right? Researchers have determined, and then all the ways to searching for food, right? That's my independent clause. And then now, um, the information after the colon, this has to clarify what came before, right? It has to clarify the information that came before the colon. It has to hit back on it. It has to refer back to what was previously talked about, right? Um, to refer back to it. And it has to do so in a clarifying type of way. Remember, it's different from expanding. It does not expand on what was previously talked about, right? But instead, it clarifies it. It hits back on it, right? Now, if you notice here, it's exactly what it's doing, right? Because the independent clause says, oh, we know, researchers know why. They've determined the reasons that roundworms move in opposite directions when searching for food, right? So the information after the colon here kind of clarifies, well, what those reasons are, right? So it says, oh, the magnetic field points down into the ground. That's one of the reasons why it moves in the opposite direction, right? Or the reason why is in the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points down, but in the southern hemisphere, it points up, right, away from their surface. So that's why they move in opposite directions. Can you see how the information after the colon here refers back to what was previously talked about, and it clarifies it, right? Again, that's hard to do, right? So in this case, you don't have to do that, yeah, to get to the correct answer, but it's still great to know. And it's a great thought exercise. It's a great exercise in thinking, right, that a lot of you guys should do when checking to see if a colon is used correctly. Highly recommended to all of you guys, okay? But in this case, we know that B, C, and D are wrong because these are all run-on sentences. And we know that for sure. These are easier to spot, right? And so we know that A would be the correct answer, okay? Can you guys kind of start to see what we're doing here, right? So next question, you guys. These are all just different types of punctuation rules. And you know that punctuations are often tested with sentence structure, okay? So here, noticing we have commas and no punctuation, but we also have fanboys words, okay? So one of the concepts that you'll need to know is the fanboys word. And you know that when you have a comma plus a fanboys word, right, this can be used to separate two independent clauses. Right? So when you have a I see, comma, fanboys word, I see, that is grammatically correct, right? It's grammatically correct, okay? This is a grammatical way to separate two independent clauses, okay? If you only have a fanboys word and no comma, this is a grammatical error. It's a run-on sentence. If you only have a comma between two independent clauses, we already know that's grammatical error. It's a run-on sentence, okay? So you have to have a comma and a fanboys word to grammatically separate two independent clauses, right? Now, I'm pretty sure that's what they're going to test. That's what you're going to be tested on in this question, because you notice, you kind of see the answer choices, right? Kind of in that way. And so, but I wanted to give this question to you guys to really teach you guys about the comma and the fanboys. If you're not familiar with fanboys, again, it's something that you want to look up. Fanboys is just an acronym for the 7 different coordinating conjunctions in the English language, right? F stands for, A stands for and, N is nor, but, or, yet, so. And again, this isn't a lesson on fanboys or grammar in depth, right? Which is why I'm not going to spend time talking about this in detail. But if you have questions on it, please let me know in the comments, and I can create videos for you guys. Okay. Normally, yeah, I don't have a lot of time. I'm already give you guys 50 minutes, and it's gonna be closer to like an hour and a half, and so that's already too much time for me. So let's just jump right back into it then. So you're reading the sentence, right? It says the Alvarez theory. That looks like my subject. Oh, the Alvarez theory looks like the subject of my sentence. Developed in 1980 by physicist Louis Walter Alvarez and his geologist son Walter Alvarez. This is just the non-essential information, right? Separated by 2 commas. So I know this is not important to the sentence structure. Maintained is my verb. The Alvarez theory maintained that the secondary effects of an asteroid impact caused many dinosaurs and other animals to die out. That's my complete sentence, right? Independent clause. But it, right? It. So I notice a new subject here, right? So I know I'm thinking, oh man, I have two independent clauses, right? This is what goes on in my head when I read the sentence the first time through, and I'm just making observations, right? It left. Right? Left is going to be my verb, right? So I have a new subject and a verb, new subject, new verb type of pattern. So I know I'm going to have a new independent clause, right? So it left unexplored the question of whether unrelated volcanic activity might also have contributed to the mass extinctions. This is my second independent clause. Can you guys see, you guys, right? You have to read to the end of the sentence and just make observations. The observations that I made is like, oh, I have two independent clauses, right? So now what does that tell me? That tells me that I have to have a proper punctuation to separate these two, right? So I know, like we mentioned, right? You have to have a comma and the fanboys word to separate the two. Right, so I know that B is going to be my correct answer immediately, and I know that answer choice A, C, and D are going to be wrong. They're all wrong for the exact same reason. They all create a run-on sentence. Can you guys see that? No punctuation mark, just a comma, and only a fanboys word, right? Between two independent clauses still creates a run-on sentence. Okay, you can't have that, right? So you have to have a comma and a fanboys word, not a comma or a fanboys word to properly separate two complete sentences. Okay, capiche? So that's good. Moving on. So now this is where you guys, right? One of the types of punctuation marks you'll be tested on is just a question mark, right? You notice that here, and it's going to be tested on, you're going to be tested, two of the answer choices will be a question mark, two of them will be a period, okay? And what you're really tested on here, the concepts, direct question versus an indirect question. Yep. A direct question is basically when I ask you a question directly, right? What did you eat for dinner? Did you have fun? Right? Who's that girl over there you're talking to? Do you like her? These are all just direct questions, right? Indirect questions. So with direct questions, you guys, uh, these are basically just they require a question mark, right? And the structure of a direct question is you have a verb that's presented before your subject. Okay, so it goes verb and then subject, right? So if I say, do you like her? Right? Was it fun? Right? The verb kind of comes before the subject, okay? In terms of that arrangement of words, right? For indirect questions just kind of naturally blend into the sentence. These are more statements, right? These are statements that have a question kind of asked indirectly, okay? A statement with a question that's asked indirectly. So, for example, if I say, I I wondered, I wondered what you had for dinner, right? Or I wondered who that girl is over there, right? Or, I was curious whether students in Korea, right, study harder than students in America. These are all indirect questions, right? Where the question is kind of embedded kind of indirectly into the sentence, right? So indirect questions will end in a period because they're statements. Yeah. And you kind of see, right? So if I say, I wonder, I was curious about what you ate for dinner, right? So the way that I would ask that as a direct question is just, I would say, what did you eat for dinner? Can you notice the difference? What did you eat for dinner? Right? Versus, I wondered what you ate for dinner, or I thought about what you ate for dinner. It's different, right? So indirect questions kind of blend into the sentence, right? Whereas direct questions are just asked kind of separately, right, apart from anything else in the sentence, right? And so uh, indirect questions, right, will end in a period because they are part of the sentence or the statement, not a question. Okay. And the structure, the arrangement of words will go subject before the verb, right? But then the verb. So if I say, I thought about what you had, right? What you had for dinner, right? So I thought about what you had, right? So you would be the subject and how would be the verb. Versus if I ask you the question, direct question, what did you have, right? Can you guys see? So so did is the verb here that comes before the subject you, right? So I thought about what you had for dinner versus what did you have for dinner, right? That's the arrangement of words. Now, why this is really important is because the SAT will create wrong answer choices that have those two errors that I just mentioned. They're gonna put question marks for indirect questions, and they're gonna put periods for direct questions, right? And they're also gonna like mix and match, right? um, the wrong arrangement of words, right? So they're going to put a subject before the verb for direct questions, and they're going to put, verb before subject for indirect questions. They're just going to mix and match these errors, though, right? Typically, these questions don't give students that much trouble. But you do have to kind of read in the context of the sentence, right? It is kind of important to read the context of the sentence to figure out whether you use a direct question or an indirect question. Okay, so if we read the sentence, it says, if these plants were grown in alkaline soil alongside grasses that aid in iron solubilization, comma, and then from there it says, could the blueberries thrive? Michael was determined to find out. Now, this is pretty important. This is the important context clue here. What was he determined to find out? He was determined to find out the answer. The answer to what? The answer to this question here. Okay? So Michael was determined to find out, right? That implies that he doesn't know. It also implies that he wants to find the answer to something. Well, what does he want to find the answer to? He wants to find the answers to a question, right? So we know that this underlined blank is going to be a direct question, right? So we can immediately get rid of the periods, right, as statements. And then now, if we look at it, it says the blueberries could thrive, right? The blueberries could thrive. Right? Or do we say, could the blueberries thrive? Right? And then you say, Michael was determined to find out. He was determined to find out if they could thrive, right? So which one would be correct? Right? Part of it is you can kind of tell. You can hear it when you read it, right? You know that D would be correct, but if we look at it grammatically, notice how we have the verb could that comes before the subject, right? Blueberries. Notice how the incorrect answer my pen, my handwriting seems to be getting worse and worse as the class is going on. The subject comes after the verb, right? The verb could comes before the subject. And that's going to be correct for direct questions that end in question marks. Notice how answer choice C here uses a question mark, which is the correct punctuation, but then the arrangement of words is backwards, right? We have the subject blueberries that comes before the verb could. We don't want that, right? So we know that C is going to be wrong there. Yeah, so D would be the correct answer for this question. Can you guys see it? So again, if you guys are curious about learning more about this, write in the comment section below, or just research on your own, right? Direct question versus indirect question. You can find out some just good grammatical knowledge based off of that search. Couple more, you guys, that I wanted to bring to your attention before we close this session. But I hope you guys are finding this helpful. And what's interesting, you guys, is we've only scratched the surface of this. There's so many more things to uncover, and I still haven't told you guys the one foundational piece of knowledge that you need to know, right, to help you guys master all of this. This one core piece is going to help unlock all of this stuff, right? So the way that I'm able to do this is all because of I have this very solid foundation. And I can teach you guys this foundation. This is my bread and butter. This is what kind of brought me recognition in Korea, right? They call me the grammar doctor because of this, and I'd love to share with you guys. Okay, so that is coming up soon. Not in this video, but in a future video. So be on the lookout for it. So Noticing, looking at the answer choices, right? We have a colon, we have a dash, right? And then we have a comma here, okay? So this is interesting. Um, the sentence reads, right? I'm going to read from here. Her 2014 novel, Boy, Snow, Bird, for instance, is a complex retelling of Snow White, while her 2019 novel, Gingerbread, offers a delicious twist um, on the classic tale of Hansel and Gretel. Okay, so first and foremost, um, is this. Notice answer choice A, you guys. Yeah, we have a single dash, right? So what I mean by that is when we plug answer choice A into the passage, this sentence here, right, starting with her novel and then ending at Gretel, this sentence here only has one dash in it, right? I call that a single dash, right? Technically, it's called an M dash, but no need to get fancy, just a single dash, okay? Now, the reason why I mention this is because the punctuation rules for a single dash is different than the punctuation rules for a double dash. When you have a double dash in a sentence, right? When you have two dashes in one sentence, you have different punctuation rules that you have to know than if you have just a single dash in a sentence. Okay? And that's the importance of this. And choice A here just has a single dash. And so here's how I can teach you guys a simplified version of the rule is we learned the rule for a colon already, right? The information before the colon has to be an independent clause, and the information after the colon, right, has to clarify or refer back to what was previously talked about, right? You can think about the information for a dash in that sort of basic same way, right? The information before the single dash also has to be an independent clause. Okay, if we don't have a complete sentence before the single dash, right, then it's not grammatically correct, right? So you can cross it off as an incorrect answer. And then the information after the dash, right, is again going to, so this is where it is similar to the colon because it is going to clarify, it can clarify what was previously talked about, okay? But the single dash is just a little, it goes a little bit further, right, than a colon does, because it can also just explain, right, the information before the colon. It can just be used as like a dramatic pause, right? And then it can kind of continue the sentence. So it doesn't always have to refer back to what was previously talked about like a colon can. It can also just be used as a dramatic pause, right? And then just expand on the sentence. But that's not what you have to, that's not what you should know right now. I think right now, just know that the rules for a single dash is similar to the rules for a colon. We can get into the nuances later on, but right now this should be your base. And then we can kind of change it a little bit, right? Or adapt it a little bit when needed, okay? When we get more advanced. But right now, as a basic foundation, this is what you should know, okay? So now, why is that helpful? Because if we look at, and I'll talk about the rules for a double dash in the following question, but if we look at this, you guys, do we have an independent clause before the dash if we plug in A? So it says, her 2014 novel is a complex retelling of the story Snow White. Now, that is an independent clause, but do we have a complete sentence? Then it says, while her 2019 novel Gingerbread. And then it stops there, right? Do we have a complete sentence before the dash? No, right? It's an incomplete sentence, right? It's not a complete sentence. Why? Because we don't end a sentence with while her 2019 novel Gingerbread. That's not a complete sentence, right? While her 2019 novel Gingerbread is just a subject, right? So we don't have a complete sentence here. So we know that the dash is not going to work. Okay? We know that the single dash is not going to work. And again, using the same logic here, because a dash and a colon, they function in similar ways, right? In terms of your basic knowledge, you can think about them as functioning identically, right? Where the information before the colon and the dash has to be a complete sentence, right? So you know that logically, oh, well, if A is wrong because I don't have a complete sentence before the dash, then I know that D is also going to be wrong because I don't have a complete sentence before the colon, right? So you can just cross out D immediately as well, okay? And then now we're left with B and, oh, now we're left with, if you think, man, he sure is sloppy. This is how I am in class as well. I'm all over the place, but that's okay. I'm just here to serve you guys. So now here's a cool rule for commas, you guys. Yeah. So there are so many rules for commas, right, in the English language. Fortunately, you don't have to know all of the comma rules in the English language. You only have to know about 20. Okay. And so because there's so many more, there are a set of rules that the SAT will test you on over and over and over again, right? So those are the core rules that you have to know for commas, right? We don't have time to go over it today. Go over it in a future lesson. If you want that information, please let me know in the comment section if you're having trouble with commas, which I know a lot of students do have problems with. But one of the things that you have to know about commas, you guys, is comma do's and comma don'ts, right? Do's and don'ts of commas, okay? So the SAT is going to create answer choices that violate comma rules. In other words, you know, what you should not do for a comma, the SAT will create an answer choice that does, right? The SAT will create an answer choice that violates comma rules, okay? Now, it's good to have these comma don'ts and comma do's kind of in your mind handy, ready to go. Because if you can precisely tell me why an answer is wrong, you have a ton of power on this test, right? So here's the thing. One of the most important comma rules that you should know is you never is a strong word, right? But you never put a comma, you never put a single comma between a subject and a verb, okay? So a single comma is never used to separate a subject and a verb, right? Why is that really important, right? Well, it's important because the SAT violates this comma rule all the time, right? They do it so often. So here we know that the subject is her 2019 novel Gingerbread. That's the subject, right? What's the verb? Offers, right? So you never ever have a comma between the subject and a verb, right? So you just a single comma. Okay, let me say that again. Comma don't, right? You never put a comma, a single comma between the subject and the verb. You never have a comma between a subject and its verb. The only time that you'll see commas between a subject and a verb is when you have two commas that appear between a subject and a verb, right? Oftentimes you notice you have like non-essential information, right? That appears between a subject and a verb. Non-essential information is a very common thing to place after a subject. But if you have a comma that comes before to open up the non-essential, after the comma, after the subject, you also have to have a comma, right, that closes the non-essential and appears before the verb, right? So in this case, you'll have two commas, right, that appear before the subject, between the subject and the verb, okay? But you won't have one. You'll never have a comma that appears between a subject and a verb. When you see that as an answer choice, you know it's going to be wrong immediately. So cross out B, right? So this is why C here is going to be the correct answer for this question, okay? So again, getting into comma rules now, right? The SAT can test you on commas individually, like just by itself, because there's so many comma rules that you have to know. They can test you on it separately, but they can also test you on commas together with other punctuation marks, right? Like we saw here, colons, semicolons, dashes, periods, right? You guys will oftentimes see commas with other punctuation marks as well. Okay, but just know that they can also just be tested by themselves, which I think I have. Nope, I didn't. No, I don't have that here. But again, if you guys want information about that, please let me know. I can create a video for you guys. I just want you guys to engage with me. You tell me, you precisely identify the problem that you're having or the question that you want answers to, articulated clearly, right? And then I'll give you guys the answers. I can find those answers out for y'all. We notice here What I wanted to show you in this for this question, you guys, yeah, is again, we noticed punctuation marks, but I wanted to show you guys this double dash, right? We talked about single dashes in the previous the previous question, right? The rules for a single dash. Well, the rules for a double dashes is going to be different, okay? So what do I mean by this? Well, answer choice C, notice it has one dash in here, but when you plug it into the sentence here, this underlined blank, you know you know that there's going to be two dashes that are created, right? This one dash here between earth and in, and then now this dash here between springs and to. Okay, so we have double dash, right? We have two dashes in one sentence. Okay, so what is the punctuation rule that you have to know about double dashes or two dashes? Well, the punctuation rule that you have to know here is that the information between the two dashes is just non-essential. Non-essential information is a very important concept that you have to know extremely well to score highly on the verbal section of the SAT. Um, Non-essential information in its basic form just means it's not necessary, right? It's information that's not essential or not necessary, right, in this sentence. In other words, if you remove non-essential information from a sentence, it's not going to affect the grammar of the sentence, and it's not going to affect or change the core meaning of the sentence. Okay, that's what non-essential information basically means. And the SAT is going to test you on this several times, but in several ways. But here's a tip that I want to share with you guys, okay? So I mentioned, right, when you guys are reading to the end of the sentence, you just make observations. One of the things that you guys can make observations of is punctuation marks, right? So you know, the more that you work with me on this, the more that you'll start to see, right, how my mind kind of operates when I do this stuff. So when I'm reading the sentence, I'll take you guys I'll give you guys a kind of a look into what my mind kind of does, right? So how my mind kind of thinks. So basically, I'll be thinking out loud. Okay. So the sentence, the passage reads, the 47 geothermal springs of Arkansas Hot Springs National Park. Ooh, that looks like my subject. That's what's going on in my head. Are, ooh, that's my verb, right? Okay, this is going to be, we're going to have an independent clause here. Where does this complete thought end, right? So the hot springs are sourced via a process known as natural groundwater recharge. Ooh, okay. The independent clause ends right here. Have a comma. Now I have a dependent clause, right? A which clause, right? In which, in which rainwater percolates downward through the earth. Oh, I notice a dash, right? In this case, the porous rocks of the hills around hot springs to collect in a subterranean basin. Okay, yes, this is how my mind operates when I'm reading for grammar. When I know I'm tested on grammar, like punctuation and sentence structure, I'm reading in that way. Now, this is different than how I read for a reading comprehension question, right? Like a main purpose or a main idea question. Um, and so yeah, just like some of you guys read for different intentions, right? Some of you guys read books for pleasure. Some of you guys read it to learn skills. Some of you guys read it to learn knowledge. Some of you guys read it to impress a girl, right? Or impress a boy. I think most of the time guys are doing things to impress girls. Girls are typically not impressed by guys, but we read for different purposes, right, or for different intentions, right? Well, one of those intentions you have to learn how to read for is reading for grammar, and this is how I do this, right? Get into this video too later on if you want it as a separate video. But I notice making observations, right? What are some of the things that I observe? I observe independent clauses, right? Is this a complete sentence as it's written, right? Is it a run-on sentence? I also notice or observe punctuation marks, right? And so I notice, ooh, I have a dash here. And so immediately when I look at the answer choices, right, my eyes will go to the second dash. Okay, now here's why. Generally speaking, you guys, when you have one dash in the sentence already, usually, not always, but usually the second dash is going to be correct. Usually it's right. So I want you guys to check this first because it can be a really time-saving technique. Okay. So here's how you check it though. We mentioned already that the information between the two dashes is non-essential, which means that when you remove it from the sentence is still grammatically correct. So that's the first thing that we're checking for, right? Is the grammar still proper, right? Is the grammar still correct when we ignore or remove the non-essential? Okay, so we're just going to be reading around the non-essential to see if the sentence still makes grammatical sense. Okay, so it says the springs are sourced via a process known as natural groundwater recharge. We're just looking at this dependent clause here, in which rainwater percolates downward through the earth to collect in a subterranean basin. Ooh, so rainwater percolates or, um, moves downward through the earth to collect in a subterranean basin. That looks pretty good. That makes sense, right? It's grammatically correct. This is why the rainwater percolates downward through the earth. It does so to collect, right? To be collected in a subterranean basin, right? So grammatically, it's correct. That's the first thing that we check for, okay? And the second thing, so once we're done there, we're not done yet. We also have to now check inside the double dashes, right? Inside the dashes, or between the dashes, I should say. So you want to check this part here. Now, we mentioned that this information between the two dashes is non-essential, right? So this is how you check for it. Almost always, this non-essential information is going to be used to clarify, right, the information that came before. It usually is meant, the non-essential between two dashes is usually meant to clarify the noun that came before the first dash, but it can also be used to just, it can be used to just modify something, right? The entire clause or something. Just kind of depends, right? So in this case, we look at this up inside. It says in, so now we look at the information between the two dashes, and it says, in this case, the porous rocks around of the hills around hot springs. So the porous rocks. So is this used correctly? Does it clarify what came before? Sure, because it's talking about the earth, right? It percolates down through the earth. So what part of the earth? Oh, the porous rocks of the hills around hot springs. Done. Right. So we know that the information between the two dashes is clarifying the information before, right? By clarifying what part of the earth, right? Um, the porous rocks, right? So we know it's used correctly there. So we know that those two checks, check one, the grammatical structure is still okay. It still makes grammatical sense. And check two is the information between the two dashes does clarify what came before it, right? So when those two things check out, you know that C is going to be the correct answer. Choose it and move on. You're done. You're done. Okay. You don't have to check anything else, right? So that's a very time-saving technique, right? Usually when you already have one dash in the sentence, usually the second dash in the answer choice is correct, right? You just have to check those two things, all right? Those two things that I gave you guys tips for. So the last of these questions that we'll cover is this one here. Now, what are we looking at? Yeah, this is cool. So now this is going to be more advanced, you guys, okay? So don't worry if you don't know this yet. It is just good to know. Don't be like, oh my gosh, there's so much information to know. Like, this is an advanced concept. But I think some of you guys are going to be ready for this, right? So this is just good to know. It can be helpful for those of you who are already pretty good at this stuff, but want the more nuanced exceptions to these rules. So we talked about a rule for a semicolon, right? What's the rule for a semicolon, you guys? You're like, what? What is a semicolon? Well, semicolon is this guy, right? What's the rule? We know the rule is IC, semicolon, IC, right? What punctuation mark does it function similarly to? Semicolon is similar to a period, right? Semicolon and a period are functionally identical, right? Because a period can also separate two independent clauses, right? That's the basic rule. That's the rule that you're going to have to know 99.9% of the time in sentences that you encounter on in real life. And I would say a little bit less, right? About 95% of the time for sentences that you encounter on the SAT. But there is a very specific rule of a semicolon, right, that you also have to be familiar with for the SAT. Okay. Now, guys, a semicolon can also be used. Again, don't get confused, right? Because what you guys have to know as your base is a semicolon is going to be used to separate two independent clauses. Okay. But just know that there's this extra use for a semicolon. And this extra use for a semicolon is very unique, right? It's very unique to a certain type of sentence that you'll encounter. Okay. So this when you guys encounter a sentence that has a complex list. So what is a complex list? Well, we know a list, right, is just a list of items, right? So if we say, I want chicken, veggies, and potatoes, potates. Well, we have a list, right? We have 3 items in the list, chicken, veggies, and potatoes, right? Well, this is called a simple list. Well, they don't call it a simple list, but it is a simple list, right? Because these items are very simple, right? They're just words. Sometimes you might have phrases, right? But they're very simple, yeah, in the sense that they don't have a lot of punctuation marks between the items in the list. So when you have a very simple list like this, you're supposed to use a comma to separate the items in the list. Okay? But a complex list is when you have commas that are already used within each item in the list. Like, what does that mean? Right? Yeah, so a complex list is when you already have a comma that's used within each item in the list, right? So each item 1 is chicken, item 2 is veggies, and item 3 is potatoes. Right? Well, a complex list is basically when we use commas within item 1, right? When we have a comma within item 2, and when we have a comma within item 3. It's not that we have a comma to separate item 1 from item 2, but we have a comma within the words that are used to create item 1, the words that are used to create item 2, and so forth. That's when we have a complex list. Okay? So when we have this type of sentence structure where we have a complex list, right? This is where the rule for a semicolon is going to come out, the exception rule, right? This exception rule to the semicolon is basically only for sentences that have complex lists. So for a complex list, a semicolon can be used, right? A semicolon can be used to separate items in the list, right? And that's because we already have commas, right, within each item. Okay, so we'll find that to be the case here, right? So if we take a look at the sentence, you guys, it says Nigerian-born author BM's celebrated literary by the way, you guys, I have to mention this because some of you guys are probably going to be thinking, well, he doesn't know how to pronounce words, and how is he teaching us English if he's not pronouncing? Guys, this isn't a test of pronunciation. In fact, the SAT will purposefully put words that are hard to pronounce to trap some of you guys. So those of you guys who are very judgmental about I have to pronounce words perfectly, you're going to lose a lot of time being distracted by pronouncing words. You're going to lose a lot of your focus, right, by being distracted by words that are hard to pronounce. Forget about that stuff, right? A smart test taker is going to not pronounce words, right, that are difficult to pronounce. They're going to find shortcuts to it, right? As long as you know this is a person's name, As long as you know this is some sort of work or some sort of book, right? Some sort of prose that they did, it's fine. You don't have to pronounce it, right? So that's why I did BM, right? And O, right? As long as you know mentally that, oh, this is a person, Nigerian person, and oh, this is some sort of literary work, that's enough. Okay, so don't judge, right? It's not effective, right? Remember, what's my number one goal for you guys? It's not to look cool, it's not to make friends. My number one goal for you guys is to help you miss fewer than 5 questions consistently, right? So everything that I do is geared towards that goal. All right, so it's all intentional. Okay. um so here it says the celebrated literary O includes The Joys of Motherhood, a novel about the changing roles of women in 1950s Lagos, A Kind of Marriage, a television play about the private struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria, and Head Above Water, her autobiography. So guys, notice how we have a list. Can you kind of hear the list here? Right? Here we have the first item is going to be The Joys of Motherhood, a novel about the changing roles of women in 1950s Lagos. That's the first item. The second item is A Kind of Marriage, right? A television play about the private struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria. That's the second item. And then the third item is Head Above Water, her autobiography. Okay. Now, if we look at this, this is called parallel structure, you guys, right? Parallel structure basically tells us that when we have a list of items like this, we want to make sure that each of the items is written in a similar pattern, either in a similar pattern of words and a similar pattern of punctuation. Okay. So notice how you guys, the pattern of words here that we have, um, the pattern of words that we have here is we have the title of the book, right? And then we have a comma, and then we have some kind of description about the book, about the title, about the some kind of work. Can you guys see that? So that's the pattern here, right? And then we have a semicolon to separate item 1 from item 2, right? And then a semicolon to separate item 2 from item 3. You guys see that? So The Joys of Motherhood is the title of the work. Then we have a comma here, and then we have the description of Joys of Motherhood. So what is Joys of Motherhood? Oh, it's a novel about the changing roles of women in 1950s Lagos. Right? So this description just kind of provides more details about that work, right? Beyond the title. So the second item is going to do the same thing. So the second item is going to be A Kind of Marriage. Right? That's going to be the title of the work. So how do we separate the title from the description? We use a comma, right? So then it says a television play about private struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria. That's going to be the description of A Kind of Marriage, right? So what is A Kind of Marriage about? Oh, it's just a television play about the struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria, right? So we want to separate the description and the title with a comma, right? So we can cross out answer choice C here because a colon can't be used. We need a comma, right? And choice A, B, and D all use a comma to separate the title from the description. So those are okay. And then lastly, notice how we have the punctuation mark, right? And this is where we have the semicolon. So we can't see that between item 1 and item 2 yet because that's what we're being tested on, right? But we can see that between item 2 and item 3. Right, so item 2, the title is A Kind of Marriage, and then the description is a television play about the private struggles of newlywed couple in Nigeria. What punctuation mark is separating item 2 from item 3? We have a semicolon. And we know that when we have a list, we always have to have a connecting word, right? Like and is almost always the connecting word that you'll see, although you can see connecting words like or but sometimes, right, to connect items in a list. But and is almost always the connecting word that you're going to see. So, but notice how we have a semicolon, right? That's going to be used to separate the second item from the third item, right? And the third item that we have here again is going to be the title, Head Above Water, comma, and then now her autobiography, right? So give me a little bit of a detail about Head Above Water. Like, what is it? What's the detail about it? Oh, it's her autobiography, right? Um, Good. So this is parallel structure, right? And this is a complex list because it's a complex list. Why? Because we have a comma that's used within each item, right? To separate words in an item, and that's why we need the semicolon to separate the items in the list, right? So that unique type of that's the unique type of sentence structure that you're going to see when you see a semicolon being used to separate items from a list, right? So this is where if we're getting rid of C, um, oh, I must have done something wrong here because two answer choices are exactly the same. So I don't know what the book says, but we should have a semicolon and then a comma, right? But I have two answer choices that are exactly the same, right? We know it's not going to be a comma that separates item one from item two. It's going to be a semicolon, right? But B and D, whichever one the College Board answer choice says, it's going to be right. But it's going to be a comma and then it's going to be a semicolon, then a comma, I mean. So I'm not sure what that is, but whichever answer choice the College Board test has as a semicolon and a comma will be correct. Okay. But that's what you'll have to know, you guys, for punctuations, right? And again, this is kind of a nut. It's just we're just barely scratching the surface, and I haven't even mentioned to you guys what the I haven't even mentioned this to you guys, right? Like what the main reason that students struggle with punctuation is, and to be honest, like the reason why you guys almost all students that I see that I work with, they all have issues with sentence structure and punctuation. Like these are the two hardest concepts to master. No matter I've had students who already getting like a 1530, a 1550, and their one issue was sentence structure and punctuation, right? I also had students though who just started out with the SAT, and again, their main issue is sentence structure and punctuation, right? When it comes to grammar questions, So this is a sort of universal problem that a lot of students will face, that all students will face, which is why I was, yeah, which is why I was able to identify what the fundamental issue was. And again, I'll just kind of mention that here. The fundamental reason, right? The main reason, the root cause of all of these problems, that's the better way to say it. The root cause of all of these issues is your lack of foundational knowledge, right? With what I call the components of grammar, right? So the building blocks of grammar. There are five components, five basic parts of a sentence that you need to know, that you need to master for the SAT, and they're related to everything grammar that you do. They're most closely related to punctuation and sentence structure, although they will be related to verbs, pronouns, modifying phrases, right? All of the grammar concepts you're tested on, right, comes back to the building blocks, right, of grammar. And again, the building blocks of grammar are those basic components. So when you heard me saying list, right, independent clause, dependent clause, phrase, right? There's also another component called adjectives in a list, right? Those are the five components or parts of a sentence that you need to know, that you need to be able to identify, right? You need to be able to track and spot. You need to be able to basically know everything about um, if you want to, right, get extremely good at punctuation and sentence structure. So if that is something that you're interested in, you guys, I mean, you stuck it out to the end of this video. I hope you guys learned a lot. Please, please, please subscribe and like so we can get this video out to as many people as possible. Like, this isn't an ego play for me. I really want to try to help as many students as possible, really improve their scores, but really become more confident test takers, right, on the SAT. I know how big of a deal it is, for a lot of students, and I don't want this to be what gets you guys stuck between you and your future dreams of going to college, right, or a certain college that you might have in mind, a dream school. And so please share this video, like this video, subscribe, get this out to as many people as possible, because I am on a mission to help millions of students by first helping you guys one at a time. Okay. But also, I do want to help. So for those of you guys who watch this till the end, thank you so much for sticking it out to the end. Um, Please comment. I can't stress how important that is. In the comment section, you guys do me this favor. Actually, this is what we can do. I do this in my class anyway. So in the comment section, do this. One, tell me one thing that you learned, right? One thing that you learned in this video. It could be one thing that you didn't know before, or just one thing that you learned better. Okay, just write that down in the comment. Second, tell me one thing that you're still having some problems with, right? One thing that you want more help with. Okay. And also tell me one thing that was very helpful for you, right? One thing that you liked, right? About the video, about the presentation, about something that I did, right? In this video that you appreciated or that you liked, that was effective for you. Okay. So those three things, you guys, please do that, because I do read all of the comments, and I'm actually making this video because I read a comment last night from a student. I just uploaded the verb videos last night, and a student mentioned, he says, "Hey, this is great. Thank you. But then can you make one for punctuation as well?" And so this is my just woke up, I was like inspired to do this for the student. And so this is the kind of person that I am. I just need that feedback from you guys. You guys tell me what you need help with, and I'm there, man. I'm there for you guys. Okay. But anyways, that'll do it. That'll be it for this class. Again, um, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate your attention, you guys. And I hope that this is going to be the starting point of a great sort of relationship that we have together. Um, I guess that'll be it. My name is Jin Sem, and again, it was a pleasure teaching you guys for this 90 minutes. And I'll be back for another video soon. Take care, you guys. See ya.